What's up YouTube? Jeremiah Hersey here, and this is the fourth episode in my Node to Pro series. Today we're going to talk about removing rows. In the last video we talked about removing columns, several different ways to do that. In this video it's all about removing rows and the different ways that we can accomplish that. So let's go ahead and jump right into our demonstration. If you want to follow along, if you look in the description down below, there's a link to download a PBI file so you can follow along with me. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. So here I am inside of my Power BI desktop, and as we've talked about several times before, anytime you have steps within inside the Power Query that have not been applied to the desktop, you're going to see this warning. But all we're going to do here is we're going to select Transform Data at the top of the screen. This is going to take us back inside the Power Query Editor where we left off last time. In the last video, we were talking about how to remove columns. Today, we're going to be talking about how to remove rows. So for this video, we're going to be starting inside of the customer table. So if you look on the query pane on the left-hand side, go ahead and select your customer table. And so in the last video, we talked about ways to remove columns using the UI here at the top, the Choose Columns option. In this video though, we're going to be talking about the options right next to that, the Keep Rows and the Remove Rows UI. So just like Choose Columns, these UI buttons are going to either keep or remove the rows based on what we choose. So as we look inside of the customer table, we can see that this very first row has some NAs and unknowns inside of it. And so I don't necessarily need this first row. So there's several ways to do this. I can select the row right here from the left-hand side, and I can select to remove rows. Now when you go to remove rows, you're going to have several options. Do I want to remove the top rows, or do I want to remove the bottom rows? And so most of the time I use the remove top rows function, but you can see there are different options available. We can also remove duplicates within inside of a row. We can also remove blank rows and errors. So for this instance, we're just going to remove the top row. So when we choose that, it's going to ask us how many rows from the top row would we like to remove. And so in this case, we are going to choose 1. We're going to remove the very top row. And obviously you can choose as many rows as you want to. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Remember that every step that we make inside the Power Query Editor is recorded over here in the Applied Steps section. So we can see that step, remove top rows. And as we talked about before, this gear icon means that I can modify this step. So if I ever needed to go back, I can select the gear icon and change the number of rows that I want to remove. Now we also, at the top of the screen, have a Keep Rows option. And so notice we can keep the top rows, keep the bottom, arrange, duplicates, or errors. So two different ways that we can remove rows within inside of the Power Query Editor using these UI options. Let's go check out our city table, our query over on the left-hand side. I'm going to select city. And once again, we can see that we have this first row that needs to be removed. One thing to take into consideration is that the Power Query Editor only brings in the first 1,000 rows of data for profiling purposes. And so as we make these transformations, it's only based off the first 1,000 rows. And so when you're going to use the Keep Rows option or the Remove Rows option and you want to remove the rest of the rows, it's going to be difficult if you don't know how many rows are within inside of your table. So that's why I say typically I use the Keep Top Rows function, because you can see how many rows you want to remove. Now the other thing that I want to talk about is as we select the row, okay, you'll notice that we're going to get a preview of what's inside of this row down below. So anytime you select a row or a cell within inside of the Power Query, you're going to get a preview of what's inside of it down below. So if I select state province here, so notice as I select NA, the individual cell, it will appear here at the bottom. That's where you can also copy the value as well. If you select the entire row, it will give you the value within inside of each cell within inside of that row. Now the other way to remove rows is to use this little icon here in the upper left hand corner of the table. And so if you click on this drop down, it's going to give you the same options as the UI at the top. So we can see here we can keep the rows or remove the rows from within inside of the UI. So that's the other way to use the drop down here. And so what I'm going to choose here is I'm going to remove the top rows just as I did before with the UI, but this time I'm going to use the drop down. So I'm going to click the drop down and I'm going to choose to remove the top rows. Once again, it's going to ask me how many rows do I want to remove, and I'm simply going to tell it to remove the very first row. And there we have it. Well, I want to thank you for joining me in this video. If you liked it, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content. And I'll see you in the next one.